Hello and welcome to this fourth webinar in the series, From Human Right to Water. Today's topic is the importance of a human rights-based approach in IWRM. Welcome to our panelists from as far apart as Honduras, South Africa, Sweden and Laos. Welcome to some of our board members and in-house experts speaking today from their special areas of expertise. And welcome to all of you for joining us today in this exciting topic for a webinar. So why is it exciting? After all, IWRM has been around for many years and we all know what a human rights-based approach means, don't we? The exciting part is understanding how we can use the international standards and norms implicit in the human rights to water and sanitation and the procedural principles that underlie its achievement to improve the way that IWRM is used to find river basin solutions for the environment and for every person in our communities, including the most marginalized and vulnerable. We're drawing on case studies from various parts of the world to explain the meaning behind this approach and to perhaps trigger some new ideas for fulfillment of these crucial rights. I'd first like to hand over the stage to a board member from Human Right to Water, Maximilian Campos, who is currently Senior Chief of the IWRM Department at the Organization of American States, OAS. Max has an influential background in IWRM, hydrometeorology and climate at the Regional Committee on Hydrologic Resources and regularly contributes to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and Special Reports. Max has kindly offered to introduce us to this topic. Max, if you'd like to take the floor.
Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everybody to this fourth webinar on human right to water, which is part of our webinar series. For me, it's a pleasure to be with all of you, and let me start mentioning that in the topic that we are going to talk for this morning, afternoon, or night for some of you, is about how important is the human right based approach into the integrated water resources management. And I would like to very briefly to start saying that and remembering some important facts in time. The first of all, these facts must be, of course, the 2010 moment when the human right to water and sanitation was approved by the General Assembly of the United Nations. Then a second very important moment for this process of human rights and its approach to IWRM is in 2012, when the Council of the Human Rights of the UN passes a resolution giving a special emphasis to the topic of accessibility to potable water and sanitation services, to financial sustainability of the system, to the international cooperation and civil society participation, and on the accountability. And above all, the UN also insisted to the countries to work on an approach that includes the human rights into water management. And I see this as a crucial moment in which the UN is inviting us to put together the issue of integrated water resources management that was well established in the world at that moment with the human right approach. And why is that very important? Well, because when you go to the definition of integrated water resources management, you are talking about coordinated development and management of water and other resources in other words, to maximize the benefits for the economic and social sense, but also everything must be in an equitable manner without compromising sustainability, especially when we talk about the ecosystems and the environment. So I think that the connectivity between the two topics is something natural, especially when in 2012 it was this invitation to the water managers to include the human rights, but from a very specific point, which is its governance. In some way, the 2012 Human Rights Resolution, when they talk about accessibility, financial mechanisms, participation, accountability, what we are talking about here is about the governance of water. So I think that when we have in combination the integrated water resources management, which is at the end is water for everybody, and the governance, which is necessary to have this integrated water resources management, and then we have the human rights approach, you have a very good combination to reach water security, and which is at the end some of the things that we are looking for. And also finally, a final comment is that with the human right approach, bringing to the integrated water resources management, we are guaranteed in many ways that the most vulnerable, the marginalized, that those people that are normally not included within all this process of water management are in certain way included. I always put the example that integrated water resources management is like having a great car. It's having a Ferrari in your garage, but without good governance, you cannot drive this car, because the good governance, the legislation, the participation, the accountability, the transparency, the finances, all these institutions, all this is the road in which this car is going to drive. But now with the human right approach, we are building a highway instead of just a rural road. So with this example, I would like to end saying that the moment of the combination was given, integrated water resources management and human rights approach is natural, because it is governance, the one that is putting them together, is inclusions, is including the marginalized and the most vulnerable. And I think in that sense, we have a great panel of people that are going to talk about the specific of this in different parts of the world. So I would like to give the floor back to Amanda, giving these few words of introduction and setting the tune for the rest of my colleagues to participate. Amanda?
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. I really like your metaphor about having a good car, but you need a highway to drive it on. Our second speaker is Jenny Grönwall, an advisor on water policy and rights and water governance at SIWI. I know Jenny as a groundwater expert first and foremost, but she's also the human rights-based approach focal point for SIWI, and has co-authored a manual on the HRBA approach to IWRM, along with UNDP, CapNet, and my old team at Waterlex. As we've recently been working together on an update to this online course, I'm very pleased to invite Jenny to provide you with some background to this topic. Jenny, if you'd like to take over the stage.
Thank you, Amanda, and thanks, Max, if I may. It was a wonderful introduction, and I will be setting the scene by taking a step back, and I am going to assume that a lot of you listening in today, you actually do not have everything covered when it comes to IWRM and HRBA. So let me start with giving you the basics on those two, and then say something about why we should take a human rights-based approach to IWRM. So IWRM, it addresses interests and problems that occur in the same river basin and the actors whose arena this basin is. And when this concept saw the light of day, it was novel in putting this unit or scale instead of administrative borders center stage. And IWRM acknowledges competing but related problems and interests in finite and vulnerable water resources alongside land and other connected resources. And it aims at breaking the silos at all levels and emphasizes integrated working modes and coordinated and cross-sectoral measures. And as most of you probably know, the concept as we know it is based on the UN Earth Summit's Agenda 21 and the Dublin Principles from '92. And today they're also promoted under SDG 6, Target 5. And IWRM builds some predefined normative principles, including stakeholder participation and recognition of the roles that women play in water management when drafting and agreeing on basin plans. So the human rights-based approach, it emerged in the 90s and can be framed in different ways, but according to a common understanding that the UN adopted in 2003, the goal of the HRBA is that all programs of development, cooperation, policies, and technical assistance should further the realization of the human rights. This involves a process where human rights standards and principles should guide all work. For instance, that all human rights are universal and inalienable. And this should all lead towards an outcome, being that taking a human rights-based approach contributes to relevant actors' capacities and the empowerment of people. And as indicated in the common understanding, there are important procedural dimensions to the HRBA, including non-discrimination and equality, participation and inclusion, and transparency and the rule of law. Pretty much good governance, which Max mentioned previously as being something that was added very much in 2012. And finally, the HRBA adds the concepts of rights holders and duty bearers as fundamental, and duty bearers primarily refers to the state. Now, why should we apply an HRBA to IWRM? Well, among the rationales for this interface, depart from how IWRM emphasizes procedures and institutional arrangements for cross-sectoral and even transboundary collaboration, while the HRBA lays as much focus on process as on the substantive rights and corresponding obligations, such as the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation. And the HRBA contains steps to further the realization of water-related human rights and obligations, those that are at stake in a river basin, by identifying those rights and obligations together with the rights holders and the duty bearers. And those steps also include comparing those rights and the actors with the applicable water law, and for instance, individual land property rights and water rights. By a water right, I here mean, for instance, a water abstraction permit or a license for emission discharge. So by applying the HRBA, it serves to highlight where the human rights need to be better integrated in planning and execution, and by whom. And because the HRBA involves clear allocation priorities, which I will come back to, it facilitates for IWRM planners to integrate those stakeholders and enable coherence and mainstreaming of the human rights and their linked obligations, not least where we are talking about large and transboundary river basins.
Jenny, if you could wrap up.
Yep, I have a final slide. For us in the water community, it may seem obvious that water has a crucial importance to realize water-related human rights, but from the IWRM perspective, it has become increasingly clear that the human rights framework offers something, an added value. It raises the bar and adds important values to the 3 E's that underpin IWRM: economic efficiency in water use, social equity, and environmental and ecological aspects, by first ensuring that in decisions to allocate scarce water resources, they must first set aside water for personal and domestic use, for so-called safe drinking water, and prioritize vulnerable groups. From the human rights practitioner's perspective, on the other hand, it's likewise important and for them that water resources play a crucial role to realize not only the human rights to safe water and sanitation, but also for a host of other rights to life, to health, to food, to healthy environment. And hence the IWRM processes, including basin situation assessment, mapping of the water resources availability, quality conditions, and so on, and other steps for agreeing on a basin plan, they are critical, and so is active management of the resources in a collaborative manner. Thank you now.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I think that gives quite a nice summary of actually the course that we're working on a human rights-based IWRM, and really sets the scene for how it differentiates, how it is different from an IWRM process itself, and adds something more to the program. I'd like to introduce Dhesigen Naidoo now. He is known to many of you as the Chief Executive of the Water Research Commission in South Africa. We're lucky to have him as the President of Human Right to Water, and he brings with him a wealth of experience in science and water against the backdrop of political governance during his time in several ministries in the South African government. When I asked Des to speak about some African case studies that could exemplify the human rights-based approach, he didn't hesitate. We're looking forward to hearing some good practices and challenges faced in his region. Des.
Amanda, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. As it happens, even though we practiced it in advance, I'm having difficulty sharing my screen. It is allowing me to do so.
Des, we can't hear you very well. You need to make it a bit louder.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Just.
Okay, I'm not sure how to solve that. It's on maximum on my side.
Just speak as loudly as you can.
I will speak as loudly as I can. Thank you very much indeed, colleagues. And what I want to share with you is some perspectives on the human rights-based approach to integrated water resource management from an African context. Let me start at this point. Human rights is a major issue in Africa, and there are many reasons for that. Not the least reason being, 100 years ago, we Africans didn't own any of this African continent. It was very much part of the colonial world. This is some of the divisions that we had inside the system. And our liberation, which began in the 1960s, has become something that has been resonant with many Africans across time. More recently is the South African experience, and we come from a background of oppression. We come from a background where human rights were trodden on. And for this reason, human rights continues to be a vital part, a principal pillar, if you like, both in national policy as well as in continental policy, as you will see it expressed in Agenda 2063. But this is not an issue of old. This continues to be something that plagues us into the present. And this is not an issue only for the African continent. This is in fact an issue the world over. As Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, emphasized when he did this year's Mandela Lecture on the 18th of July, and he talked to the notion of tackling the inequality pandemic in the world. How does this go into the IWRM space? Well, firstly, just to remind you that we're looking at SDG 6, and all 5 other components of SDG 6 depend very strongly on an integrated approach, and in particular, integrated water resource management. So the points I want to make about the African continent in particular are as follows. One, looking at the African IWRM scorecard, and this was done by a variety of organizations, and you will recognize all of them, led and coordinated by AMCAO on behalf of the African Union. The African IWRM scorecard as at 2018 is not very good, because although we have 82% of the elements of IWRM institutionalized in legislation or policy, and we think we have 70% of the capacity that we need, finance continues to be a crucial barrier, and our overall scorecard is stuck at 41%. In certain domains, we do rather well. Transboundaries is one of those areas, but even with the transboundary issue, we see a vast difference between, on the one hand, surface water, and on the other hand, aquifers. So while we have gotten on top of a lot of the surface water intonation sharing in the basins, and we have some of the very best transboundary arrangements in the world, as is evidenced by many indices, this is not replicated in the aquifer domain. So the 3 specific points I want to make about Africa are as follows. 1, Africa is a global laboratory for IWRM, and there are many reasons for that. One of which is that given the rate of growth of the African continent, it is quite clear that this is going to be an economic powerhouse for the world in the future. But interestingly enough, 50 of the megacities that are predicted to be in operation in Africa within the next 25 to 40 years don't currently exist. This gives us the opportunity for water-sensitive design being a primary feature of our planning paradigm. And in fact, we have the opportunity of both brownfields as well as many greenfields options in this domain. The second I want to point out is that Africa has leadership in very particular domains. So Africa boasts with the global first in the world around non-sewage sanitation standards. Now, why are non-sewage sanitation standards important in the IWRM context? Well, one, it is probably the only mechanism by which we are actually going to achieve SDG 6.2 by 2030. Two, this has become a very important part of the mix all over the developing world. And interestingly enough, in one of the recent assessments in the OECD countries as well, not only for the reasons of access, but also for the reasons of the circular economy being something that has better opportunities in the IWRM context with non-sewage sanitation as opposed to waterborne sewerage. But ISO 3500, which organizes for the legal regime of this to work in the world, was firstly led by some African partners, and I must acknowledge the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that coordinated this effort to achieve ISO 3500. But the first two countries in the world that have had national standards in this domain, first Senegal and second South Africa, both Africans. And this is one of the opportunities that we need to explore in much greater detail. The third example I want to point out is this, that we need new models to achieve IWRM. I mean, Jenny did a very good job around reminding us around the human rights-based approach around IWRM, but clearly we need one, better thinking around it, two, more novelty, three, demonstration on site. And this is a phenomenal example. It's a project that was sponsored by the African Development Bank. It was placed in South Africa, and the idea was to develop models of community-based and driven approaches to ensure access to water and the development of appropriate infrastructure in a way that ensured its sustainability. And these are some of the folk that have been involved in that project, and we are very proud of what they've been able to do. We have a sustainability model now in 10 of these villages on the back of this project. We are replicating this in many places around the continent. And in fact, the African Development Bank has a plan to use this as one of the primary models to use all over the world with its international partners. So colleagues, what we have here from the African perspective is one that for a long while still, we think the human rights-based paradigm is going to be a crucially informative one that talks to policy, that talks to action. Two, it is quite clear that there aren't enough resources on the continent in spite of our huge ingenuity, that we need lots of international participation. But three, we have the opportunity to experiment with these models that we want to see in the future of sustainable water management in the world with a demonstration site that constitutes not only 54 countries in the largest continent in the world, but also the one that has the youngest population. And that demographic dividend can be realized not only for the African continent, but for the world and for responsible water management. So with those couple of words, I want to stop sharing at this point and say thank you very much. A lot more information is of course available on the website of the WRC. Thank you very much indeed, Amanda.
Thanks, Des. And I think that the key word in that presentation was sustainability, and a human rights-based approach clearly creates greater sustainability when you involve communities in the decision-making process. So from South Africa, we can move to Southeast Asia and the landlocked region where Laos is fighting water scarcity and droughts, sharing the mighty Mekong River with its many neighbors. We're pleased to invite Diana Suhardiman today, who joins us today from the International Water Management Institute as research group leader on governance and inclusion. Her experience covers the 7 countries along the Mekong, and she has many years of research into the political economy of water governance. It's interesting to hear how IWRM in the Mekong Delta has improved with a human rights-based approach to river basin management. And I'd like to hand over to Diana. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, for a very nice introduction. I will start to share my screen now. Yes, so hello everyone. Today I will present some of our work on rights-based approaches in water governance, while linking this with human rights to water within the context of hydropower development in respectively Myanmar and Nepal, as well as WASH in Nepal. So I will place the discussion on human right to water within the broader context of water governance. And for this, I will focus on how we incorporate the notion of representation and accountability throughout our water governance research portfolio in Southeast Asia in particular, and in Asia and Africa in general. How we unpack key factors that contribute to and or hinder meaningful participation and representation, and illustrate how these factors are actually interlinked with regulatory aspect of water governance. So this is a picture of the SIWI No Dam movement organized by the civil society organization networks in Myanmar while responding to the central government's plan to build a series of hydropower dams on the Salween River. So the Salween River flows from the Tibetan Plateau to China's Yunnan province, Shan, Karenni, Karen, and Mon State in Myanmar. In Myanmar part itself, the Salween River area comprises of areas plagued by the longest running civil wars between the Burmese army and various ethnic armed groups dating back to 1949. And at present, however, the central government has proposed the construction of a series of hydropower dams. Yet it is unclear as to how various ethnic armed groups and local communities view this proposed plan. Because in 2014 and 2016, for example, thousands of villagers were forced to flee due to armed conflict occurred in the near area where they planned the dam, where they planned one of the Salween Dam site, as the Burmese army attempted to secure control of the sites for the dam constructions. So linking hydropower development in the Salween River with human right to water, our research findings actually bring to light the need to put local communities, and in particular ethnic minority groups, their development needs and aspiration central in hydropower decision making. As central government and ethnic armed groups might have different views on the Salween River development plans, we argue that conveying grassroots voices and realities is key for more equal, accountable, and inclusive development. So from Myanmar, we will move to Nepal. This is the Karnali River in far western Nepal, where the government planned also a hydropower dam, the Upper Karnali Hydropower Project, with power generation capacity of 900 megawatt. As part of the Digojal Bikas project funded by the USAID, we look at compensation issue and how the hydropower company actually negotiate with local communities living upstream and downstream of the planned dam sites. So linking compensation procedures and the company's negotiation strategies with human right to water, our research findings shows not only local communities' diverse views on the planned hydropower projects, but also the fact that these views are rooted in the way the company favors upstream villages and neglect downstream villages. And just highlight the fact that local communities' views actually cannot be discussed in isolation from the overall notion of social justice. I will now move to the WASH context in Nepal. This is a picture from one of the focus group discussion that IWMI Nepal team did in our study area in Chandranagar Rural Municipality in Sarlahi district. The research is led by my colleague Manita Raut and is looking at how power relations shape and reshape the functionality and sustainability of WASH infrastructure and services. So in Nepal, rural water systems are in generally managed by community-based organizations such as the water user groups. Being a community-based organization, the assumption goes that their mode of management and governance will be very much inclusive, transparent, and accountable. In practice, however, historically marginalized groups like the Dalits are often not represented in this committee's organizational structure. Consequently, decisions taken by the committees often also overlook these groups' conditions, such as their inability to pay the defined water surface provision fee. So linking this issue of representation with human right to water, again, our research findings bring to light the need to identify possible entry points and institutional mechanisms to ensure inclusive decision-making, even within the context where power asymmetry is very apparent. So just to quickly reflect on key advantages to link our water governance research with human right to water, I think such linkages enables us to focus on participation, representation, and accountability towards more equal and inclusive development. It also enables us to identify key challenges in existing water governance decision-making setups and processes for more meaningful participation and representations, to better understand power relations that shape and reshape these challenges, and help identify entry points to create equal playing field for powerful and less powerful actors, including the poorest and most marginalized. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. I like the fact that you brought up several examples where marginalized groups are not included in decision making, and the difficulty that there lies in making sure that inclusion happens. Even though you're aware that there's a problem, it doesn't mean that it's easy to make it happen. So I'd like to go on and introduce our next guest. Back to South Africa, and our next guest has many years of work in water and sanitation, has published widely in water and environmental management. Themba Gumbo is director of CapNet and works with a network of water governance experts globally. He's lived and worked in South and East Africa through his work for CapNet and WaterNet and the South African development community. He's sharing with us some case studies from this region also. Thank you. Themba.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Good day to everyone. It's a pleasure to talk to you today on such an important topic on human rights-based approaches, including also how it translates within this space of IWRM. First of all, I should say you've heard earlier on from Max Campos about the historical developments which led to this, what I will call maybe a match made in heaven between the two kind of fields, if you like. What I'll say as an analogy, I'll maybe compare it to a marriage, you know, this is an important marriage, I should say. But like any other marriage, after the vows and the pomp and the fair is over, couples need to start, you know, putting down some kind of rules and also some kind of boundaries on what they have to do in order to consummate that marriage fully. So I come from a background of, you know, through CapNet, where we are involved in trying to unpack some of these principles, some of these approaches, and making sure that they are translated and they are used on the ground through capacitating and also through empowering various stakeholders. So what what I need to what I want to share with you very quickly is the is how we've engaged in this space. Of course, CapNet, we've set ourselves to be the global hub in terms of online training. And this, we do it through our dedicated networks. So networking is an important aspect to us. And also, most importantly, the generation of new knowledge, state-of-the-art knowledge in the subjects that we deal with. So these are kind of our three pillars of engagement. So as an example, in the past 5 years, CapNet has partnered with a number of international partners, which involve ACID, OECD, SIWI, UNDP, Waterlex, and WIN, in coming up with a specific training manual on human rights-based approach to integrated water resources management. And to date, we've trained more than 200 participants with an outreach to more than 90 countries. There's been 3 key areas which I would like to highlight where these interventions have borne some fruit. So I'll share this very quickly with you. The first one is that, this has also enabled the fostering of academia involvement in the IWRM sector to develop and strengthen learnings and raise awareness on IWRM and HRBA. And in this case, I can quote from some of the anecdotal stories that we got from Mexico, where this raising of awareness through education also inspired the Mexican government to such an extent that the Mexican government considered a new national water law following this training intervention. The second aspect where also we've made an impact through these training interventions is that we've generated groups or community groups of awareness while strengthening community involvement, ownership of new practices to develop, strengthen new habits and behaviors. Because this is quite important in our engagement to link this to the theory of change, because at the end of the day, what is important is that there's change and there's move from theory to policy and also to practice. Down there, you can see we have a short example, which I've just highlighted, coming from Malaysia, also with regard to solving water pollution in the Batu River, which involved a number of stakeholders and also community involvement. Lastly, the third area which I want to highlight, where we have also made a difference in the last 5 years, is that these training interventions have brought together key stakeholders and allowed spaces for discussion and reflection, learning and joint planning for design, revision of policies, plans, and strategies. And here, again, I just highlight one case study, which is coming from the Congo Basin, which also brought in a number of key stakeholders in combining both IWRM and human rights-based approaches in solving the local problems in the Congo Basin. With those 3 examples, I would like to say, thank you for listening. And I would say, remain in touch. There is more which is coming in terms of our efforts in expanding the training and also the outreach in IWRM and human rights-based approaches. So please keep connected and watch a lot on what is going on, maybe from our website and also from other social media sources. With that, I would like to stop here and say back to you, Amanda.
Well, thank you very much, Themba. And it's, I'm glad you highlighted the importance of the strength of community awareness and ownership in terms of creating a human rights-based approach. Now, moving westwards to Latin America for our last 2 panelists, I'd first like to welcome Fabiola Tábora, the Regional Coordinator at Global Water Partnership in Central America. Fabiola works on sustainable water management policy and strategy at national and local levels. This part of the world, especially Honduras, is renowned for the community-led ASADA management systems that encapsulate a human rights-based approach. It's going to be interesting to hear Fabiola's take on how these community water management systems have been developed and how well they work. Fabiola, please.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello to everyone. As Amanda said, I'm going to talk about IWRM and human rights to water and sanitation, giving you the Central American perspective, and at the end focusing a little bit on the Honduras case. So as you can see, in general, countries in Central America report to have a good access to water and sanitation according to the official data. But you see there's still a gap between the urban access and the rural access to water. In general, the coverage of water and sanitation in the countries of Central America go from 82% to 99% in some cases. But you can still see some images like these where children and women still need to walk, to invest almost 3 hours sometimes in a day in order to go and bring some water for their domestic use, or you are not sure of the quality of the water that communities are consuming for their domestic use, or people and population needs to buy water, and sometimes they need to invest almost 50% of their income in buying water. So these are some of the challenges that still remain in the region, and that so one of the mechanisms that has been in place is the establishment of community-led water systems, and 40.4 million people, almost 34% of the population of Central America, is covered by these kind of systems. And these are community-led organizations. They are participatory, they are inclusive, but they still have some challenges in order to provide the service in a better way. And these challenges has to do with institutional arrangements that where they can be recognized as legal organizations that can operate and that can manage funds, for example, to improve the service. And other challenges deal also with financial constraints, such as the sustainability of the system. So in order to overcome these challenges, we must establish improved and integrated policy, regulatory and institutional frameworks. We must also work on the establishment of mechanisms for the participation of communities, users, and women, considering the lowest level possible. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about how these communities and how these organizations can participate at municipal, but also at national level in the decision-making processes. We also need to provide equitable access to water resources through participatory and transparent governance and management. And we need to integrate management, means that we receive multiple benefits from a single intervention. And in order to accomplish all these, we have IWM as a framework, we would say, but also as an instrumental approach in order to advance and improve the human right to water with a human rights approach. And IWM, and if we consider what is established in the SDG 6.51, we will need to work in policies and regulatory frameworks, making sure that these include an IWRM approach, but that not just includes it, but also it is in implementation. We would also need to establish this institutional mechanism, making sure that we have institutions that have a clear role in the implementation of IWRM, but also that we have the participatory mechanisms in place so that we make sure that women, youth, and other vulnerable groups have access to information, that they are part of the decisions, and that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that this happens. And also we need to establish management tools, management tools that gives us information and data about how is the quality of water, how is the quantity of water, are there basin management plans in place, and how this information that is provided by the implementation of these management tools helps us, for example, to solve conflicts among users, on when communities are sometimes in conflict with other big users because they don't have enough water for their own domestic use. And financing, this is always a challenge. How do we make sure that we have the funds available to implement all what I said before? We can talk about the under example where two important laws were approved, one in 2003, the Water and Sanitation Law, and they consider, in a sense, the IWRM approach. This Water and Sanitation Law gives the responsibility of the provision of the water and sanitation service to municipalities. So municipalities are in charge of the service provision, and they are in charge also of coordinating with the community-led organizations in order to make sure that they are providing a good service to the population. It also recognizes the responsibility of the service provider to protect the source of the sustainability of the service. So usually, for example, the community-led organizations, they have basin committees where they try to implement actions for the protection of the service, or there is also a mechanism, a legal mechanisms in order to recognize the existence of this watershed for the provision of the water service at community level, and this is recognized, and there is a legal tool that gives communities the right to protect this area. It also recognizes that the model for the provision of the service should be agreed with the participation of the communities and population. And the idea of this also is that communities are aware and participate in the provision of the service, and that the model that they choose, if it's going to be a completely municipal public system, so they have the right to decide this. And also in 2009, the water law was approved, and the law promotes the establishment of basin organizations for the management of a water resource with the participation of different sectors. And the sectors that are also included here are basin organizations, but are community-led organizations as part of these of the creation of the basin organizations, and also recognizes the domestic water provision as the priority use of water. So there still is a long way to go in order to accomplish and for the implementation of the human right to water, but we believe that this is a good start, and that the countries are in a good path in order to continue strengthening this approach of IWRM with a human right focus. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Fabiola. That was really interesting. And what I like about the Honduras example is that they have a law and policies already including a participation and a mechanism for inclusion of women and youth and marginalized groups in decision making at the community level. And it's a good example for other countries to have a look at. So our last guest is the legal director at Human Right to Water and a former judge in Costa Rica. Geraldine has more than 20 years, actually as many as I do, of experience as a private lawyer, litigator, trainer, and consultant. Her programs cover the Latin American region, providing legal advice, municipal and community workshops in many countries. Geraldine is going to talk to us and introduce us today to the story of Mexico, where we've supported CONAGUA over the last couple of years in their introduction of a human rights-based approach to water management. Geraldine.
Oh God. Oh.
Yeah, screen, it's the green button at the bottom, Geraldine.
Yes. Oh God.
Why don't you speak, and I'll share your slides for you if you like.
Okay. Thank you.
I just need to find them first.
I was so prepared and something happens as always. Well, good morning and good afternoon and good night, everybody. Thank you very much to be with us today. As Amanda says, I'm going to talk about the process that Mexico has followed to introduce the human right to water and sanitation into river basin management, and the need for indicators to track compliance. Mexico is a very large country with a demand for water for human consumption and varies greatly from one region of the country to another. With an even higher demand for water for agricultural use, this makes the management of water and the protection of the human right to water and sanitation in basin management an interesting challenge. According to the current national water law, the Mexican National Water Commission, CONAGUA, has the responsibility for national water management, and the supply or demand for water and human consumption has been delegated to municipalities and other water operators at the river basin level. Next, please. Given that Mexico is a federal state and there are 13 river basin authorities in Mexico, all of which have been run independently, the challenge is great. CONAGUA now is preparing special programs with an interregional and interbasin nature, for which we will design tailor-made human rights indicators. Next, please. The rights-based approach means, as my colleagues already comment, integrating human rights norms and principles in the design, the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of water-related policies and programs, as CONAGUA is doing. In line with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, we can consider non-discrimination and equality, participation, access to information, and accountability as cross-counting indicators. CONAGUA made a great effort last year to work on the development of the National Water Program, which will govern Mexican water policies for the next 5 years. It integrates these guiding principles to the objectives of their National Water Program, such that all processes can be more inclusive. Next, please. However, it's not enough to introduce new policies without training and awareness programs for the 12,000 operational staff at CONAGUA. The institution has committed to a long-term training program to help staff to understand their duty and what it means to protect people, human right to water, and how they can achieve this through a change in approach. Next, please. The following charts provide a simple visual for what we mean by human rights indicators. Indicators can be quantitative, statistics or numerical, qualitative, with information beyond statistic that cover any data articulated as a narrative or in a categorical form. Could be also be categorized as fact-based objectives or judgment-based subjectives, so dependent on human perception. Without monitoring changes over time, it is difficult to assess where are needs for investment, whether stakeholder engagement is capturing the relevant vulnerable groups and how the different human rights to water for domestic use, for food, for health, for healthy environment, and other vulnerable groups like indigenous people, women, etc., are able to be fulfilled. By sharing the data transparently with the community stakeholders, it is possible to calibrate and correct actions that will ultimately provide a more equitable distribution of scarce water resources. The third stage of the project that we are working on with CONAGUA is to design human rights indicators that can be used both to help with understanding that the new policies means for people, and also to provide a method of monitoring their success in achievement. It is through this process of monitoring human rights indicators that each river basin authority will be able to track their own compliance with human rights for water and sanitation, and hence realize progressive realizations to SDG 6. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Geraldine. And I'm just going to come back again. So that brings to a close the main presentation for the day. What we'd like to do now, I'm going to hand back to Max, who will moderate some questions for the panelists. And while he's doing that, I'm going to be going through some of your own questions online through the chat and the Q&A, and we'll have a chance at the end to answer some questions from the attendees, followed by some last wrap-up comments from the panelists. So Max, if I can hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and congratulations for the panelists. I think that they did a wonderful job. I hear a lot the word participation in most of I think that in all the presentations, this is a strong word that really guarantees this issue of governance, the possibility of putting together the integrated water resources management with the human rights based approach. I hear about sharing the benefits and in equal power relationships. All these, I think that they're very strong words that lead us to this section. We only have 10 minutes for all of us to respond a few questions that I have prepared for you. And just going straight to Jenny, I would like for her to try to answer something about how does marine water connect with the process of integrated water resources management, and can a human rights-based approach help in this regard? So Jenny, very, very short question.
Okay, to be very short, the IWRM process, it actually typically stops at the river basin's outer boundaries, so the dividing ridge between drainage areas, and at the mouth of the river, which is normally where the river reaches the sea. So marine waters, coastal areas, are not covered by a typical IWRM process. And this is partially why the more recent Stories to Sea approach has been developed and taken hold. An HRBA lens could help in this regard by putting more focus and reminding of, for instance, the human right to make a living for those who has the sea and oceans as the source of their income, and other human rights such as the right to life, healthy environment, to safe drinking water, for those who live in nearby coastal areas. And for instance, if the drinking water for people in the river basin is actually produced from desalinized seawater, then you definitely need to take into account the quality of that seawater, etc., for those in the river basin we're talking about. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. I think that is a wonderful answer. Now let's jump into Des. The question for you would be, how can integrated water resources management experts start including the human rights-based approach into their process? Des, you are mute. Des,
am I okay now?
Now you're okay.
Thank you very much, Max. I think the important starting point is that the ramp onto that highway that you talked about earlier comes from the international legal environment. We have a UN resolution on this, and it's its 10th anniversary this year, is to organize for different state actors to embed that rights-based approach into their constitutions and then into their water law. And once you've done that, then you create the right kind of enabling environment within which the experts can get particularly clever about more useful protocols, more useful techniques, but it's also about the convergence of understanding. So the education component is absolutely critical. And the support tools to make that happen, absolutely critical. And Human Right to Water and many of its partners have such toolboxes that are already available for people to use. Thank you.
Thank you, Des, really. Let's now jump to Diana. Your question would be, how do we get more women involved in IWRM process? Diana?
Yes, thank you, Max. I think in this context, I mean, I would like to broaden the scope of the question a bit in terms of not only women, but also men and women, but also kind of emphasizing the role or the need to include most marginalized, I mean, the poorest from the gender and ethnicity dimension. I think one way to include them more in the processes of IWRM is by being aware about this existing power asymmetry, about being aware about of the current exclusion, about being aware that integrating everything doesn't mean that we will be able to include everyone. So we have to be aware of the various loopholes that is very much apparent in the concept of IWRM itself. I think the issue of power, the issue of exclusion, inclusion, the issue of justice, the issue of relational management. And only by being aware about all those aspects, then we can try to kind of, close the loopholes a bit or address the gap.
Thank you very much, Diana. Just to the point. Let's go to Themba and let's ask him about that. Based on your experience, do you think that the integrated water resources management experts are starting to include the human rights-based approach in their systems, and how, if you could describe that as an example?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Max, for that question. And my quick answer would be yes, but I'll come back again and say it's they are mixed results. I think I'll go back to your story about the Ferrari. You know, we have the supercar, but maybe the superhighway is still under construction. So as you'll appreciate, IWRM and both human rights-based approaches are quite nebulous concepts. And for them to translate into real tangible outcomes, it takes some bit of time. We've seen in certain case studies which are coming to us in terms of stories after a period of time. Of course, we've been involved in this in the capacity development more or less for the past 5 years. But the stories which are coming are not yet conclusive. So I'll say, in short, it's still work in progress, in as much as we would like to accelerate from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much. Then let's go to Fabiola in Central America, and the question would be something like, what is GWP, Global Water Partnership, doing to encourage a more human rights-based approach into IWRM process?
Thank you, Max, for that question. So as you know, GWP is a global water partnership, and one of the mechanisms of how GWP works is through the establishment and the strengthening of multi-stakeholder platforms, where what we try is to bring all the voices of water in the same, to work together, including youth, including women, including vulnerable groups. So the idea is that all stakeholders can sit together in the same table and can agree on how and take decisions about water management. And to do this, we have regional partnerships and we have country water partnerships. And GWP strategy has three pillars. One of the pillars is SDGs, has to do with SDGs implementation, mainly SDG 6 and 6.5. We also have a climate resilience pillar and a transboundary cooperation pillar. And under the SDG pillar, we have been supporting countries in the consultation for the measurement of SDG 6.51. And this process has been very interesting because it gives the opportunity to organizations, institutions, women organizations, youth organizations, municipal organizations, basin organizations, to be part of the consultation process of what is the progress of the country in the implementation of IWRM, and also helps to identify what are the gaps and what should be some steps forward in order for the countries to advance in the implementation of SDG 6.5 1 and specifically IWRM. So I think that giving this platform and this opportunity also is a way to make sure that these organizations are aware and include also under their working plans and strategies the implementation of IWRM. So I would say that this is one of the ways where we are, how we are contributing. And also we have developed a tool here in Central America, and it was tested in Honduras for municipalities to measure the progress in IWRM. So I would stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fabiola. Thank you very much. And let's finish with Geraldine. Geraldine, Mexico is clearly a leader in the introduction of human rights, water and sanitation, and also in human rights-based approach for water service supplies. But it still has a long way to go. What do you think it is the most important criteria for ensuring that this is a progressive realization?
Thank you, Mark.
It's a long question, but it's very easy for you to respond to.
Thank you, Max. Non-discrimination, the right to equality and the principle of non-discrimination are among the most fundamental element of international human rights law. A human right-based approach seeks to identify people and groups left behind, identify the reasons why certain people cannot enjoy their rights, such as the existence of a discriminatory law or an absence of regulation, or maybe only social practices. In this sense, the human rights-based approach seeks to analyze the inequalities that lie in the heart of the development problems and correct the discriminatory practices and unfair power distribution that impede the progressive realization. Then, yeah, of course, is non-discrimination.
That's a good point. Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you, Geraldine, and thank you all. Before giving the floor back to Amanda, just in 30 seconds, I would like just to thank you all. But also, I feel that we are in a good momentum. We're moving forward. We are integrating water resources management that is very well consolidated in most of our countries, especially developing countries, as an alternative for sharing and doing water for everybody, inclusion and all things. But now, with the melting with the human right-based approach, I think that we are getting the right mix of this concrete that is going to smooth the pathway for the Ferrari to move. So I think that if we follow with this example, in near soon, we are going to have more and more examples, especially coming from our developing countries and coming from the basis, from the people, from the field, from the more vulnerable. So I think that this is what is this about today. Most of the examples that we hear today were from the real people, from the communities, and that's very nice. And I think that the panelists did a great job putting these examples on the floor. So Amanda, just one more minute, and back to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Max. That was interesting to hear the different perspectives from the panelists, and it's such a broad topic that it's almost impossible to just concentrate on one aspect of it. And I've noted from the chat and from the Q&A that we have questions all over the place, and I'm sure we can't sort them all out today, but I'd like to just maybe pick out a couple that I think are constructive to answer in this context. One from Tommaso Abrate, who talks about data transparency and availability. And he says, I'm going to read it actually, basin situation assessment and stakeholder involvement are among the key elements of a human rights-based approach to IWRM. However, the exclusion of communities from decision-making was also mentioned among the major obstacles to its actual implementation. Besides legal and cultural aspects, another element that contributes to this exclusion is the lack of data on the status of water resources, or the difficulties of the communities to have access to this. So I think it would be, I won't read the rest of that, it's on the chat line, but I'd like to hear from any of the panelists who'd like to address the issue of data transparency and how a human rights-based approach and access to data can actually improve the access to water for marginalized communities. Perhaps we have some examples or opinions on that. Please volunteer. Otherwise, I'm going to pick on someone.
Can I start, Jenny?
Yes, please, Jenny.
Okay, so as Amanda mentioned, I have another hat, which is groundwater. And there is a lot of experience now building from different parts of the world, not least India, where participatory mapping and monitoring on the ground with villagers, end users of water involved, to make them understand, make them take more ownership of groundwater as a resource, is really contributing to them being part of the decision making. And if you do this right, if you have a really good intention with this, you ensure that pretty much everyone is involved in this, or that is at least very, very good representation of all the stakeholders in this group, and that you link it to wider developments in the sub-catchment, the sub-basin, and wider whole basin. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks very much, Jenny. I think it's just one aspect of the human rights-based approach, but it's really critical connecting the technical with the understanding for local people. Does anyone else want to address that question, or shall I move on to the next one?
Can I please, Amanda?
Yes, yeah.
Dhesigen. Yeah, I think it's a crucial question. And, you know, the motto of my own organization is Amandla Orwazi Kubantu. It means the power of knowledge to the people. I mean, the reality is that knowledge is power, and in the current context, data is power. And one of the things that we have to work very hard at doing is organizing to demystify data and information. And frankly, the folk who are around the table, and we are all experts of some sort or the other, one of our talents is organizing to obfuscate very simple information. So distilling it out becomes absolutely crucial. And most often, the most effective way to do it is build your data sets bottom up rather than top down, to move from communities being the subjects of research to being part of the research team. And we have got many examples all over the world of how this works extraordinarily well. And of course, I'm sure that some of the people on this also know about something called the Algorithmic Justice League. And that's around the Western biases of how we currently use artificial intelligence, and not recognize that this supports a very particular power base in the world. Thank you.
I like that. I was the bottom-up approach in terms of data collection makes a lot of sense. It's about collective decision-making and engagement and including people in the whole process. And actually, that leads on to one of the other, there's been several questions around about human rights indicators. And number one, how can you apply it into different circumstances, particularly in countries like India, where it's very diverse. But also, we had another question from Colin asking how you actually can ensure that the legal texts that we're talking about in terms of standards and norms can actually get implemented. And I think that this is connected with the collection of data and monitoring and indicators. And I'd like to open the floor on the question of how we can apply human rights indicators and what the benefit of doing that can be in terms of compliance. I'm assuming that Geraldine would have liked to have jumped in on this one in terms of indicators. Geraldine, do you have some comments on this?
Thank you, Amanda. Well, I think the first stage of everything is the law. That's because I'm a lawyer, sorry. But then, as Des said, if we go to the bottom of the society and we can collect all the information and we can identify all the needs and all the and really the needs of everybody without discrimination, then is how we can improve the way to use the law. But the people have to know, the people who live in the society have to know what the law says and have to understand for what is the data that is collecting and have to see the changes that it can have with this. Then I think it's not only one action, but a whole holistic approach that is needed. And it's something that we have to do is a path that we have to walk on in that direction.
Thank you, Geraldine. Diana and Fabiola, do you have some examples where you think that that compliance has been improved by the involvement of the community? Regardless of whether you name it a human rights-based approach or not, it's very much about participation and inclusion.
Yes, well, I think that when you, I think that participation is also linked with training and with knowledge, because if the communities don't know the importance of data, the importance of indicators, then maybe they are not going to be involved in its implementation. But maybe I can provide an example about sustainability, financial sustainability of community water systems and the importance, for example, of monitoring water quality and the importance of monitoring water quantity. So when you provide the communities with information regarding water quality and how this is related also to the establishment of a sustainable tariff, for example, how they can decide that it's okay to increase, for example, a water tariff in order to improve the quality of the water that they are receiving in their community. So I would say that this also is contributing to improve then an indicator. And accountability, it's important how you can how these organizations have these platforms and assemblies where they can share the results of the actions that they are taking. So that's what I would say for now.
Thank you. So we have 9 minutes left. I'd like to make sure that each of the panelists has a chance to maybe say a few words at the end. Fabiola, while you're online, do you want to just make any wrap-up comments just quickly that from what you've heard today?
Yes, well, GWP has been working in strengthening and supporting countries in strengthening water governance. And we have been working a lot at national level, supporting countries in the establishment of water policies, water laws. But as it was said also, sometimes these processes are not as smooth as if we wanted. And the approval of these kind of tools depend on a lot of factors that you not necessarily are in control of. And then when you have a law or a policy instrument, a regulatory instrument approved, then it comes the implementation, right? And this is one of the big challenges. So I think that it's good also to work at other levels. For in our case in Central America, at municipal level, also at a local level, and try to advance things also on these levels, and try to support the establishment of these platforms, multi-stakeholder platforms, because this is also key when you try to advance this kind of governance mechanisms, that you have already in place these coordination platforms where stakeholders are aware, where they are aware of the need of approving these two instruments, but also of the implementation. And this is going to be a fundamental element to make sure that these governance instruments are approved, but then they are also implemented.
Thank you, Fabiola. Perhaps Diana could say a few words. We have about a minute each. Diana, do you have?
Thank you, Amanda. I think one of the thing that probably key message that I want to take to get across is probably the importance of having strategic alliances, because I mean ensuring human rights based approaches getting implemented or having real significance required a lot of work to be done, required a lot of challenges and even structural challenges to be removed. I mean, not only from the issue of power asymmetry, but also in terms of financial interests, you know, like global development, and how difficult it is to kind of promote really meaningful participation, representation, and accountability in the world that is not perfect. So I think from that perspective, if we are to push for human rights-based approaches, we need also to push for collective action and building alliances with all actors that are on the same page. So we should not compartmentalize, like segregate it even more. We should kind of finding our strength and weakness and try to build a stronger network that where human rights-based approaches can be done more strategically.
Lovely, thank you. That's a really good point. That we need to work together, all of us, more on this. Themba, maybe I can ask you to make your final comments.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. My final comment really is coming from where we sit as CapNet, as a global network on capacity development for sustainable water management. Of course, our mandate, we are a purveyor of water knowledge, and I will say we would like to continue, working in that space together with the usual international partners to make sure that human rights-based approaches in IWRM are subjects which are, broken down and understood, and that also we, at the same time, we try to reach out to the, not only to the designated officials, but also to the communities on the ground in such a way that we break down all types of social divides. Because at the end of the day, knowledge is power.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Themba. And Geraldine, have you got any more to add as a final comment?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for everybody. I think we have something very, very easy to take in account here is that if we go to the bottom, to the society, to the civil society, everybody needs water. Everybody have the interest in this issue. And it's something that we have in our, good for us, it's in our sight. Then we have to use this approach that everybody have interest in what happened with water.
Thank you, Geraldine. Des, please.
Thank you, Amanda. Look, colleagues, eventually it is about access. It's about access to water, and it's about access to the benefits of water. And I think that a major component of that is affordability, because economic access is often not engaged sufficiently. And the reality is that the marginalized, whether they're the rural poor or the peri-urban poor, are generally unserviced, and they pay the highest price for water. You know, they pay with their futures because they have to spend a considerable amount of their time trying to get it. They pay with their dignity. Some even pay with their lives. So colleagues, you know, if we are going to buy into this cliche we've all been using about getting beyond COVID and building back better, we are only going to be able to build back better on the back of a human rights-based approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Des. Jenny, last but not least, would you like to say something?
Sure. I will end on a positive note, but before I do that, I just want to mention something about the critique that has been put forward to the HRBA. For instance, that it's very academic, it's very scientific, and maybe most of all that it's actually very, very demanding to do a full root cause analysis, situation analysis to ensure to really understand who are all the rights holders, what are their rightful entitlements and freedoms and so on. And it can actually be difficult to also pinpoint who are the very different duty bearers with legal obligations and responsible parties, non-state actors. And not least is very challenging to build capacity in all those different actors, which the HRBA actually demands, the empowering part of the approach. But that being said, I really like the metaphor of the marriage, and what we have here is one people-centered approach and one water and river basin-centered approach, and a marriage between the two, yeah, it must end in heaven.
Thank you, Jenny. So we've heard from all four corners of the world, if there are just four corners. IWRM is an accepted, a complicated but necessary method of water basin management. It coordinates the development and management of water, land, related resources to maximize economic and social welfare in an equitable manner. But it can overlook sometimes the need to consider all vulnerable groups and the protection of the human rights to water, in addition to the right to a healthy environment, the right to food, to life and health. And there's often people that fall outside of regular land ownership and tenure laws, and they're not automatically protected. So these many competing and sometimes conflicting demands on water resources give rise to questions of equity and justice and what would be considered a fair or balanced allocation of water for competing uses. So the human rights system offers us an important entry point for such questions. And I hope today has examined some of the tools and case studies behind this approach, pulling on experts in human rights, water governance and IWRM. We've shared some of the thinking behind the human rights-based approach, and we'd like to encourage more inclusive management of water rights. So please, let's look at this at the start, as the start of the conversation, and we really welcome contact from anyone who would like to continue to talk to us. Come and perhaps participate in our online course with UNDP CapNet as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and I'll say good night, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you to the panelists, especially. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.